Hello and welcome to Microsoft Live. Today I have a very special guest, not only because his expertise, but also helping me to start this webcast series. And he was my first guest and he hasn't accepted it. I couldn't make it so far. And this is the 26th episode. And I am very excited to have Hayden Barnes here today. So Hayden, and thank you very much and welcome again. How are you?
Thanks for having me back. This is great. Am I your first returning guest?
Yes. And
Awesome.
I have started with you with this series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having
And
me, Mert. I really appreciate it.
okay, you're welcome. So, this is my classical questions. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Hayden Barnes. I am the engineering manager for Ubuntu on WSL at Canonical. And I am a bit of a community organizer in the WSL community. And I'm kind of known as that WSL guy for a lot of people. So that's what I do. I like talking about WSL, and I'm glad to be here talking about it today.
Okay, great. And I see a MVP logo behind your back. And
Oh yeah,
do you want?
MVP logo.
Yes. Do you want to talk about?
Sure. So I am a Microsoft MVP, Most Valuable Professional. It's an honor. Even though I spend most of my time in Linux, I'm a Windows Developer MVP. We don't have our own category yet, but I'm lobbying Microsoft hard for that. As an MVP, Microsoft, I think, just kind of recognizes my contributions to the community. Of course, there's lots of community contributors who aren't MVPs, and the community is growing. And it's part of my mission to expand the number of MVPs from the WSL community. So we'll be hopefully adding some more. Of course, there's also Nuno de Carmo, the WSL Corsair, who is another MVP kind of from the WSL realm. And, we do interesting stuff. I mean, we are, in a way, Windows developers. We're just using Linux on Windows. So I think that segues into your next question, which is, what is WSL? Am I right?
Yes, you are correct because Windows and Linux is very different operating systems. And I wonder how can we use Linux inside Windows? Is there any emulation or something like that?
So there's WSL 1 and there's WSL 2. WSL 1 is pretty legacy at this point. It's available in an older version of Windows. It is closer to emulation. It's kind of like Wine. If you're familiar with the Wine project, it implemented a Linux environment on Windows that translated system calls from binaries that would go to the Linux kernel into NT system calls. This was actually a branch of a project called Project Astoria at Microsoft, which was an effort to run Android apps on Windows Phone way back in the day. But that technology came back around in terms of enabling Linux development on Windows in the form of WSL 1. Now, earlier last year, I'm losing sense of time now, WSL 2 was announced, and WSL 2 is a brand new take on WSL. It is still a Linux terminal on Windows, but instead of that system call translation layer, it uses a very lightweight VM container environment that's built on top of Hyper-V. If you're familiar with Hyper-V, it is the virtualization technology that's built into the Windows NT kernel, kind of like KVM on Linux. So it's super fast. And WSL2 just has much broader application support. And that's because it's actually running a real Linux kernel. It's not doing the system translation the system call translation that WSL1 was doing. There's a real kernel. You can download it on GitHub. You can patch it. And thanks WSL Corsair. And it's so much, you can do so much more with WSL2. So you get performance improvements, you get compatibility improvements. So there's just more you can run and more you can do. So things like, building web applications that you can then test locally on your system, setting up things like Kubernetes distributions like MicroK8s or K3s. Those are all enabled now on WSL2 in a way that really was difficult or impossible on WSL1. And WSL2 is getting even more features as we go forward. So we can talk about that too.
Okay, from my perspective, is the biggest improvement is using WSL for Docker desktop, because before WSL2, please correct me if I'm wrong, we are using Mobile Linux for running Linux containers on Windows, and after WSL2, we can directly run Linux container on WSL2. Am I correct?
Right.
So it's a great feature for developers.
True. There were some things you could do on WSL1 with Docker, to connect Docker containers, but Docker Desktop, the new Docker Desktop for Windows, is powered by WSL. It uses WSL on the back end in a very interesting way. Simon Fairquell, a developer at Docker, he's now leaving Docker, and we're going to miss him from the WSL community. But he helped create that really powerful stuff there. But yeah, significant improvement in terms of Docker usability and speed. The thing is you basically have a Windows environment and a Linux environment with WSL. And your Linux environment can reach out to your Windows environment because you have access to your C drive, or if you have more drives like me, your D drive, your E drive, your F drives. And you can also now browse your WSL file system from Explorer through / WSL /, and you just see all your distros and your file systems. So it's really a compelling level of integration between the operating systems that a basic virtual machine just doesn't get, or is difficult to set up, or you can get, but it's just, it doesn't boot in 2 seconds. I mean, that's the other advantage of WSL is paired with Windows Terminal, the new terminal environment for Windows, you have a fully booted Linux system ready to work in 2 seconds or less on most systems. So it really is nifty. One of the things I enjoy doing is cross-compiling applications. So I will take a demo app and I can show it in because I've put the how-to on the Ubuntu wiki page for WSL, how to build an application for Linux and Windows on WSL, and then you can just run it side by side and debug simultaneously. And that ability to write and debug applications simultaneously extends beyond the terminal, but is included in like the Visual Studio extension for WSL, Visual Studio Code extension for WSL, but then also Visual Studio is getting more and more integrations for Linux using WSL, so that you can actually now use if you're building, accustomed to building applications with Visual Studio, but you are increasingly building for cloud native and building for Linux, WSL is a pathway to using your existing tools and then deploying, to Kubernetes on Azure or your cloud host of preference. So it's really what you make of it.
Okay. Before asking the new features, today's topic, I wonder how did it start? I mean, the idea of running Linux on Windows.
So it started at Microsoft, and there was Rich Turner is an interesting guy. He spent time at Microsoft, left Microsoft, and then came back to Microsoft. There's a great tweet where he says, I need to talk to someone on the Windows console team, that traditional command prompt console, because he was having an issue. And eventually he came back and they said, okay, we need to fix the console experience on Windows. And that led to a variety of different efforts. So one of those was the new Windows terminal, which Kayla Cinnamon, Dustin Howitt at Microsoft lead on, and it's a amazing improvement, huge improvement on that legacy console. Some parts of which date back to the original Windows NT, like circa 1998, NT4. So that backward compatibility that Windows is known for is amazing, but it was also holding the console back. So there was that effort, right? And then there was a recognition that they needed a bash style shell. Now they have PowerShell, and PowerShell is unique and powerful in its own right and in its own way. And people who get PowerShell can do such cool things. I don't quite get PowerShell all the time, just because I'm so steeped in Bash and Unixisms. I mean, you can see the poster behind me. I've got a Unix poster, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm accustomed to that Bash shell. And I think the team looking at that console experience and that developer experience, I know that they recognized they needed a Bash-like experience. And the initial version was, of course, Bash on Ubuntu on Windows. That was the first incarnation of WSL. It was the WSL 1. I think that was Windows 10. I want to say 1609, 1607. Windows versioning is complex. So that was really the incarnation. And, I have to give it to Microsoft for being forward thinking about having a Linux environment on 1607. Thanks, Aaron. I have to give it to Microsoft for being forward thinking about having that, and looking at the technology that was used for Project Astoria and realizing the potential there. The Pico process technology that's used to power WSL1 actually shows up in other Windows products too. Not Windows products, but Microsoft products, things like SQL Server on Windows and Windows CE application compatibility for Windows 10 IoT. So the history there goes back to recognizing the need for a Linux-like terminal for Windows. And, with WSL1, it was great. And with WSL2, they've really knocked it out of the park. And, I remember when they first told me, hey, we have this thing called WSL 2. And I was like, oh, cool. It's going to be new version. It's going to be faster. That's nice. And they said, oh, yeah, it runs a real Linux kernel. And I was like, this is new. This is going to be great. I'm ready to get PHP devs on board with WSL. Yes. So PHP is interesting because Microsoft for a long time helped back the PHP port to Windows. I think that started back with like PHP 5 or 6, but recently they announced that they're backing down from that initiative. So if you really want to take advantage of PHP 8 on Windows with the new just-in-time compiler and other advancements on that platform, the best way to get it is now WSL. And I think that was the plan all along, is to make Windows this super compelling development environment by merging the best in class from the Windows developer tools with the Linux developer tools.
Okay, so we are all listening to you on new feature and improvements. So what is new for the vNext or version 3?
Okay. Well, we've got some major improvements coming to WSL2 this year. The big one everyone is waiting for is official GUI app support. So right now you can run GUI apps. You got to install a third-party X server. There's some hoops to jump through. It's not the end of the world if you have to do it. It's possible. You got to set some variables. You got to open a port in your firewall. But official GUI support is coming. And that will, I think, open so many opportunities. Things like bringing native Linux development tools back to Windows. Things like Kdevelop and GNOME Builder and Glade, which is the UI designer for GTK applications, which you can then build on WSL and test cross-platform. So I really see a potential with the GUI applications for users to begin building cross-platform applications that aren't just Electron. And Electron's fine. And actually, WSL is great for building web apps within Electron, if that's where your skill set lies. But the capability to cross-compile native desktop applications, with using the GUI app capability, I think is really going to benefit both Windows and desktop Linux in a way that so far, WSL has benefited kind of system level stuff and cloud native stuff. The GUI application is going to open new doors. Funny enough, the GUI application support will also include audio support. So you will be able to install Chrome on Linux, and play YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it won't initially be 3D accelerated, but we have a good idea that that's coming. So that segues into the other huge development coming for WSL2 this year, which is GPU compute. So working with NVIDIA and then with Docker, GPU compute is now available for CUDA enabled graphics cards on WSL. And there's basically CUDA libraries in the WSL environment that then reach out, are kind of aware that they're in WSL and reach out and talk to your graphic subsystem in Windows, and you get native GPU acceleration for kind of AI, ML type applications, things like TensorFlow and PyTorch and statistical analysis. So right now that's NVIDIA, right? but landing soon will be more direct 3D type applications, type support. So applications that are targeting DirectX, primitives and those kind of tools you can now run on WSL and will be 3D accelerated. And the advantage of those is that the GPU acceleration works not only with NVIDIA, but with Intel and AMD graphics cards as well.
So
So
can I install Steam on WSL?
you can try. It won't be 3D accelerated. It will be slow. But theoretically, that question may be answered differently in about a year. I mean, to be honest. So with the GUI support coming, all of this 3D support and GPU support landing in the coming months, there's going to be, things you can do that you can't do now. So that will be very exciting as it does. In terms of other new features, let's see. So we've got new features. There's always new settings coming to WSL. Some of them will only matter to people who are, so WSL targets people who are new to Linux, and they might not be familiar with the Linux terminal, and they can now get started by enabling WSL and installing Ubuntu from the store, and they can just go and start learning. And then you have advanced users that want advanced features and customizations, and there's new settings landing for them, things that let them optimize performance, like memory usage and core counts, and even set new things like commands in your boot settings, so that when your WSL terminal boots, you can now actually have a simple init system. I see a question from Supernova. The new GUI thing's going to be Wayland compositor based or Xorg? It is Wayland based. It will be Wayland based and then communicate from the Wayland protocol to an RDP protocol, which is native and very baked into Windows and fast. But it's happening over a system called Veil, and there were actually really interesting presentations on exactly how this works at the Xorg conference, the most recent Xorg conference. So if you want a detailed analysis of how that's going to work and how the frame buffer is going to be pushed, directly from Linux to your screen on Windows, I highly recommend Googling or YouTubing those talks. So we have new features coming for the geeks, things like boot settings and performance tuning. We have new features coming for newbies. So the capability now, where before you had to either run multiple PowerShell commands and then download the kernel and then install a distro, it's in Insider's preview now for Windows, and it will eventually land back in mainstream releases. You'll be able to set everything up with one command on the PowerShell, wsl.exe --install. And it will enable everything, install a kernel, install a distro, and then after reboot, you're good to go. So there are new features coming across the board. Power users, new users, AI, ML, workstation type use cases, GUI apps and GUI app development options. It's going to be an exciting year for WSL2.
Okay, we have a question from hosting
Okay.
Skype. Okay.
So and I think I can say this, the WSL team at Microsoft are working very hard on improving the networking story around WSL2. WSL2 is a little more complicated on the networking side. It uses its own virtual subnet, and that the difference between that and WSL1 is that in WSL1 the networking stack was the networking stack, like it was the same networking stack. Localhost was localhost. Opening a port here on WSL1 was opening a port on Windows. With WSL2, it's a little more complicated. Things like network bridging. You got to open ports. There's a localhost forwarder there, but some applications don't always behave exactly like you would expect them to. So you sometimes end up having to, net SH to forward or open ports. It's getting better. It has gotten better, and I expect that networking will get better. I don't have any specific knowledge on IPv6 support, but that's something I can ask around about. Systemd. So Systemd is complicated because the Microsoft team wants to be able to boot to a terminal in 2 seconds. And the more we add to that, the slower that gets. Right now, there's a very basic init system, and we can now add boot commands to that init system that can, for example, using diddledan's scripts, daemonize systemd and then drop you into a namespace where you have systemd running as PID1. So it's not so much systemd support, because we can run systemd. It's getting systemd running at PID1, where right now WSL init is at PID1. So we want to make sure that the systemd is also designed to manage the full life cycle of a Linux system. And in WSL, you're opening terminals, you're closing terminals. If you open File Explorer and go to browse your WSL file system in the background, it's booting in the background. And any crispy news? That's a good question. You don't necessarily want to spin up systemd every time you open File Explorer and go to your quick actions and open Ubuntu and go to your home folder to grab a file from your WSL system. So it's a complicated problem. It's something that is definitely highly requested and we've talked about. And we're looking forward to a solution on that because, from canonical standpoint, we want systemd so that we can enable snaps, snap packages, particularly with GUI support coming. There's so many great GUI apps that are just so easily installed with, snap install code if you want to run code on WSL, for example. So it's something the team knows about. It's something we're aware of the challenges around. It's something I think we'll probably have a solution for eventually. In the meantime, we have things like diddledan's systemd script, and there's a handful of other projects out there that, there's one that spins up systemd in a container. Oh, crispy news. Okay. Any teasing that can be shared. Okay. Yeah. So there's solutions to the systemd for now. So, and that tends to be how WSL works, is that the community recognizes a need, kind of pushes the technology on what it can do, and then eventually the WSL team at Microsoft kind of sees what we're doing, sees how we're using the technology, and helps us implement that in a less hacky way. So they're doing that now with networking. They're doing that now with GUI and audio. They made some tweaks so that Docker desktop ran fantastic on WSL. So I expect to hear more about that, eventually. I don't have a strict timeline, and they haven't given one. Let's see. Unpleasant trying to install latest SQL, which is my system. No init or CR level. That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, I spun up a MySQL the other day, and I did see it, trying to talk to systemd and then having to manually start it. And sometimes you just have to then go dig out the old init RC script files to start them, which is not a great solution, not a great experience. So yeah, I think there is, the Microsoft team is aware of the request for systemd and some of the limitations at this point of not having systemd can cause. Yeah. So some Supernova mentioned that they had MySQL installed just fine. Yeah, I installed it okay the other day. I spun up a Mattermost server on WSL and used a MySQL backend and didn't have issues. So it just depends. Sometimes you just have to manually start it yourself. The interesting thing is that if you use the service command instead of system control, system CTL, I'm talking to the advanced users now. The service command, while most people associate it with systemd, will, if it doesn't detect systemd, default back to the init.rc files, which most packages still include. So if you're having trouble starting a service manually, either by calling the binary because it needs more stuff configured around it, systemctl isn't an option with systemd. Try just service and let service have a go, and you'll be surprised what can happen there. So, more questions?
And I have a question.
Okay.
And I think it's an interesting question for you because we are talking about of development and testing or for the stuff for an IT people. And I want to ask about the end users. Are there any scenarios that end users can't use WSL?
So, end users, WSL is really targeted towards new and existing devs, sysadmins, IT administrators. There's increasing possibility with GUI support that end users might end up with applications that are being run on WSL and they just don't know it. So if there is an enterprise with legacy Unix applications that they've ported to Linux that they still want to provide to Windows desktops, currently and in the near future with official GUI support, there is a possibility that they're using an application from their start menu to talk to their legacy mainframe that is running on WSL and they just don't know. So, I think with GUI support, there will be opportunities for, maybe someone wants to write an extension for winget or scoop that installs GUI applications, but installs them on WSL and then links them to their start menu. And they're actually running on WSL. They just don't know it. Applications that aren't otherwise available for Windows. So there's a possibility of that happening. And, so possibly, but not widely, not yet. Maybe one day.
Okay, and I wonder your opinion about the, we can use Microsoft Stack on Linux operating systems like PowerShell Core or .NET Core and VS Code. And also, thanks to WSL, we can use Linux environment on Windows. So there's a good mixture. So what do you think about it?
So I am. I've always been someone who enjoys mixing and mashing operating systems. Like I'm an operating system geek. So I've been using virtualization or Wine or QEMU or VirtualBox for a long time. And my theory is that kind of we're moving away from monolithic operating systems to the point where your average operating system is going to be a combination, is basically going to become a runtime. And there's going to be a shell around these runtimes. And you're going to boot kind of a hypervisor really at first, like Windows. And, if you have Hyper-V enabled, you're actually booting Hyper-V first and then the rest of Windows. And then you're booting Linux inside that. And, with VirtualBox and LXD support for Windows and things like KubeVirt is, increasing the way that operating systems are running side by side together on the same systems. Like even Microsoft is now releasing official Windows containers for Kubernetes. And Docker has support for Windows containers as well, running next to Linux. So I'm kind of rambling, but I think for the end user, like let's take, for example, Chrome OS. Chrome OS is a web shell, and you're connecting to different operating systems locally and remotely. Either you're accessing websites run on Windows Server powered by IIS, or you're accessing websites powered by Apache or Nginx on Linux, or you're using the local LXD implementation to run Linux environment locally next to your Chrome OS, or you're even using the new Parallels function that lets you run Windows on Chrome OS. So either locally or remotely, you are interacting with multiple operating systems simultaneously. That trend is only going to continue. The same thing is happening on Windows with WSL. Same thing is happening on Linux with LXD and other technologies there. Mac OS, I've seen Windows on ARM running on the new M1 with support from Parallels. So, it doesn't have the same level of integration of the others, but it's happening a little on Mac OS too. So there's this kind of viral idea out there that Windows might rebase its kernel to Linux, and that's just not going to happen. I say that, but and I hope they don't do that next year and prove me wrong. But what I think is going to happen is that these OSs are going to become a runtime, and you're basically just going to have your preferred shell. And one day, maybe you'll even be booting an NT kernel directly into GNOME, and just use GNOME full time with your Windows applications and your WSL applications side by side. And you don't know. And one day you'll boot Ubuntu desktop, and Office will just be there, and it'll run, and it'll be running in a tiny, either it'll be running on Windows, either locally in a tiny container like a runtime, or VDI in the cloud. So either way, locally or remotely, you're going to be using multiple operating systems side by side at the same time. And that trend is only going to continue.
Okay, thank you. And this is my last question. And maybe you can remember I asked this question on 30 Lives of Technology event about security. So, there are some dangerous commands on Linux. And if you run them on WSL, it can also be dangerous for Windows. So are there any security improvements on WSL?
So WSL is pretty much an open sandbox. You are, your default user on WSL on most installs, if you install from the store, is an administrative user, and with a password, you can just destroy your Linux install, like just wipe it out. Now, when you're logged into WSL, your user there only has the same level of privileges as your Windows user. So for example, you usually, unless you've given your own Windows user special administrative levels, you usually can't go delete C/Windows. You usually can't actually write to the root C drive. Now, your home folder, sure, because most users have access to their home folder. So you could, a malware script could conceivably wipe out your Windows home folder, right? The good news is that Windows Defender catches these things. Windows Defender can catch malware that is active on WSL. In fact, even things like compromised node packages that end up with cryptocurrency miners on them. If you try to download and provision them in a node project on WSL, Windows Defender will detect them, right? Because Windows Defender is now actually Microsoft Defender and is available not only for Windows, but for Linux and Mac OS and Android too. So the malware detection is there. As long as your user in Windows is properly configured, while you can destroy your Linux environment with sudo, you usually can't destroy your Windows environment. Of course, you should have backups of both at all times. Remember, 3, 2, 1. 3 copies, 2 places, 1 offsite. In terms of security improvements, as enterprise takes more interest in WSL and deploying WSL on a wide scale, I think we're going to have to answer more of these questions. And I think they'll be addressed by Microsoft or by Canonical, when customers come to us and say, hey, we want to deploy 10,000 developer desktops with WSL, but we need to lock it down. By the way, is there any explanation for the fact there is no RHEL? So there is a CentOS-based distribution in the store. It's called Penguin Enterprise. I might have had a hand in creating that before I moved to Canonical. You're going to have to talk to Red Hat. Red Hat owns the CentOS project, and they have taken and it's very possible to import these as well to sideload if they're not in the store. Red Hat has not embraced WSL. So the community has filled in the gap. Penguin Enterprise has a CentOS derivative that's available. Whitewater Foundry, the same company that makes Penguin Enterprise, also sponsors the Fedora remix for WSL, which is a remix of Fedora under the official Fedora remix program for WSL. It complies with those terms. Have a chat with RHEL And, in the meantime, Ubuntu's here. So, and Whitewater Foundry and their distributions are here. And to a lesser extent, SUSE too. SUSE's there. They're not as active, but the good news is with the option to use WSL -- import, you can find rootfs images to sideload into WSL for all of these. Arch, CentOS, Alpine. I'm sure there'll be images of the new rel derivatives that are popping up, like Alma and Rocky eventually. You don't get the start menu button that you get when you install from the store. You don't get the application alias, so ubuntu.exe doesn't, you won't get fedora.exe. But if you're doing your work in Windows Terminal, it's there, in the drop-down box. Everything is there. And if you're doing work in code, it's there in the drop-down box. So you don't really need the start menu button unless you just really want it. In which case you can use, you can create a shortcut for yourself if you want it.
Okay, and thank you very much. Okay. So are there any questions?
All right. In the meantime, I'll just show real quick the Ubuntu WSL page. We have a page here. Let's see. On ubuntu.com/WSL. It's got a link to download from the store and instructions for installing. If you're interested in deploying WSL at your company, you can get in touch with us and we will work with you and your company to customize WSL to your needs and deploy it internally. We have some things you can do with WSL, and then we have a quick tutorial here on how to enable. You've got 2 commands for now. You sometimes have to install the kernel. Then you grab Ubuntu from the store, and you have a button to run here to set up and create your new user. So this is the current install process for WSL. This is the current out-of-box experience. Right now, we are testing a new out-of-box experience for Ubuntu on WSL, and that is the Ubuntu on WSL community preview. And you can find that, and I will share this page once I have it up. Let's see. Share. If you go to the Ubuntu discourse, there's a WSL2 section. We have, this is where you can find the community preview. This is kind of like an insider's build of Ubuntu for WSL. There's some background on kind of why we created it, what goes into it. And here are some screenshots of the new out-of-box experience that is coming. You see it as multi-language. It comes with a lot more customizable options. Some of these have since been hidden behind an advanced options button so that not every new user gets bombarded with advanced options. But this out-of-box experience is based on the same tool that's used on Ubuntu Server. So if you are familiar with installing Ubuntu Server, or you're actually familiar with Ubuntu on WSL through this, you will then be ready to install and set up Ubuntu WSL on a server. So we have Community Preview 2 just came out a couple weeks ago. We refreshed some graphics, refined the out-of-box experience, and included some new tools like Ubuntu WSL and its terminal user interface to enable and disable certain advanced features. These are going to be features that pro users are probably going to take advantage of, but we're going to make it super easy for them to do that. This is actually mouse compatible, so you can actually check these boxes in WSL with a mouse. And that's thanks to the work of Patrick on our team at Canonical, who originally created Ubuntu WSL, not Ubuntu, but WSL utilities, which are a set of utilities that work across all WSL distros that give you a bunch of cool features, like the ability to create Windows shortcuts from WSL, open your Windows browser from WSL. If you click links in WSL, it'll open the correct default browser in Windows, those kind of things. So we have community preview here. This is from Ubuntu. You can try it. Keep in mind, it is pre-release. It is not LTS. It's not based on an LTS like most of our store releases. So it is prone to bugs. And if you want to try the next version, you have to destructively reset your environment, which will destroy any data you have there. Very important to know. If you reset your Ubuntu on Windows in app settings in Windows, it will wipe out what you have there. So either store that on Windows, use the export function to back it up, but or just keep your main workflow in the main Ubuntu image and help us test the out-of-box experience and tools on Community Preview, just in Community Preview, and send us feedback. Please file bugs on our Launchpad so that we can follow up on those. And we have our next Community Preview build tentatively slated for later in February, March. We are waiting on new Mesa 21 libraries to land in Hirsute, which is the code name for Ubuntu 2104. It'll probably be based, the next community preview will probably be based on a re-release build of Hirsute Hippo 2104 with the Mesa 21 libraries, so that you can go ahead and start testing some of the Direct3D capabilities that required drivers in Mesa 21. So look for those. And that will also include some refinements to the Ubuntu WSL tool, like visual refinements and other issues. So that's what we have coming there. And if you're brand new and you're like, what is all this? Don't worry about it. Go through the tutorial on ubuntu.com/WSL, grab Ubuntu from the Microsoft Store. It is here. Grab it from the Microsoft Store and just get started, and let us know what you think. You can hit me up at Unix Terminal on Twitter. You can file a bug. I strongly recommend you give it a try with the new Windows Terminal. Those two experiences just go so well together, and you can really customize your new terminal. Set backgrounds, colors. Here's crispy. Here's crispy news for Nuno. Windows Terminal is getting extensions, and these extensions will allow distros in the store to install our own themes. So when you install Ubuntu from the store, you will then get an official Ubuntu theme overlaid on top of the Ubuntu entry in Windows Terminal. So that is actively in development. Hopefully that lands soon. But you will get a, yeah, spoilers. That has been fun to work with. Now, if you've already customized it, it won't mess with it. But that is hopefully landing in Windows Terminal upstream soon. And when it does, we have our theme and our extension almost ready to go once we get some bugs ironed out. So there is that.
Okay. Are there any other spoilers?
Other spoilers, just other spoilers. Let's see. Well, we have WSL Conf. We had 2 last year. I've been really stubborn in terms of making a decision about what we're going to try to do this year. I was really optimistic back in November and December that we could have something this fall in person somewhere. My optimism kind of waned, but is coming back now. So I think we've set the end of February to make a hard decision. And by hard, I mean one way or the other. And yes, it is also a difficult decision, whether or not we will try to go do WSL Conf in person or virtual. If it's in person, it will still be hybrid. Everything will still be virtualized. It'll still be streamed. You'll still be able to interact with the in-person, because we don't think there might not be a lot of people who are actually able to make the in-person event. But for example, the Linux Plumbers Conference in Ireland in September is moving ahead as if it will be in person. So that depends a lot on vaccine availability, rollouts, travel bans, if people are allowed to travel between certain countries. I recognize that even those people, in countries that have access to the vaccine, get access. There are people in other countries who don't get the same level of access, even among some, established, more developed, quote, developed countries. It's very uneven. So we will make a decision about that soon. You can come share your thoughts on the Telegram channel that we have for WSL Conf, or yell at me about it on Twitter. I welcome that as well.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today and for your great questions and comments.
One more thing, buy my book.
Okay, sure.
So I have a book coming out from Apress. It is called Pro Windows Subsystem for Linux. Apress has an intro book from a friend of ours if you're just getting started. But if you're really looking for like a detailed manual that covers like all the nuances of the current WSL, configuration, options, performance, tuning, that is coming. So that's tentatively slated for later in March. It'll probably slip a couple months. It'll probably be later mid-year by the time it gets printed and out, just because of COVID and everything. But Nuno, who you've seen, is my technical reviewer, and Dildan has been helping me as well. So the community has played a part in that as well. I couldn't do any of this without the community. So, but yes, buy the book so that I can afford to put on WSL Conf, and hopefully in person this year. Maybe, we'll see. Thank you.
So, can you please share the link for your book?
Can I? It is
Sure.
or do you want to? It is currently on Amazon. It is called Pro Windows Subsystem for Linux. Let's see, share screen, share tab. It is here. I bought it January 6th. It is available for pre-order. Pre-orders are super helpful in terms of getting the book up the charts and get promoted. So if you think you're going to buy, even if you cancel later, please pre-order. I really appreciate it. There will be a Kindle ebook version available at a later date. So pre-order the paperback, and then when the Kindle version comes out, cancel your pre-order and then pre-order the Kindle. Just pre-order as much as you can. But it's shaping up to be probably 300-400 pages of just dense, detailed everything. It is literally a brain dump of everything I have accumulated about WSL these past 3 years, and everything you can do with cool tricks and hacks. And I've built on some blog posts that I've published before, and refined them and made them more compelling and powerful, and that's gone into the book. And I really appreciate everyone who's going to pick that up. Thank you for letting me mention. Is it available for pre-orders in markets? That seems to be very uneven right now. I'm not as far as I know, it's only available for pre-order in certain markets. But you'll also want to check the APress site for your area. I will. Where is it? Maybe I'll just search my name. Here it is. You'll also want to check the APress site. This is directly from the publisher, and it seems to have more reach. Like, for example, right now it's quoting in Canadian as the price for the US. So if it's not available on Amazon for pre-order, take a look and see if it's available directly from the publisher. So yeah, it says 280. It's going to be so many more than 280. It says 40 illustrations. I've got chapters with like 40 illustrations just in one chapter. So it is going to be dense. But if the advanced stuff we are talking about today intrigues you and you want to go further, does this book include everything? I think so. It includes everything I thought to think that I thought to include. The good news is I've had people from the community help me with the book. So there have been input there that might have missed, where I might have missed some things. They've helped me plug in. So I couldn't have done it without them. But pick up the book when you can in your area of the world. And I will, if you follow me on Twitter, I will try to keep folks updated on when and where it becomes available. See, like right now it says, March 19th. That will probably slip because honestly, the WSL team keeps including new features that we then have to go write up and put into the book. So it'll probably slip a little past March 19th at the current rate, but definitely later this year. So please buy my book. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. This was a great session, and many thanks to Hayden. And hope to see you again in further episodes and the new WSL features.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for just letting me talk and answer questions. And we got some good questions, good engagement. This has been great. Thanks again for having me.
You are welcome. So see you. Cheers.
All right.